Ethan squeezed her hand gently. Because I see you. Not the disability, not the crown, not the whispers. I see you, and I want a life with you if you'll have me. A sob escaped her lips, but it was not a sound of pain. It was relief. It was hope. It was joy she had never known. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, trying to steady herself, but the tears kept falling. Yes, she finally whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, I will. Ethan smiled, and for the first time she saw his eyes soften with the same tears that filled hers. He gently pulled her closer, and she leaned against him, feeling his strength wrap around her like a shield. For a long moment they stayed that way under the moons, two souls who had found each other across the stars. The following days changed everything. When the Empire heard of their union, the reaction was mixed. Some were shocked, some were angered, but many, far more than expected, celebrated. They had seen Ethan's bravery. They had seen Leora's wisdom. Together, they had saved the Empire. The Emperor, though hesitant, could not deny the truth. His daughter was no longer a shadow in the court. She was a leader, and her bond with the humans symbolized a bridge between two peoples. On the day of the ceremony, the halls were filled with both aliens and humans. Flowers lined the path, and banners of two worlds waved together. Leora entered the hall not as the shunned princess, but as a woman walking with pride. Beside her, Ethan stood tall, his head held high, not as a soldier, but as her chosen mate. When they spoke their vows, the court fell silent. Leora's voice did not shake. I was once unwanted, she said, her eyes shining. But this human chose me not because of duty, not because of power, but because he saw me. And I choose him with all that I am. The hall erupted in cheers. For the first time, the Empire celebrated her not as the disabled princess, but as their princess. Strong and loved. Ethan looked at her and whispered only for her to hear. I told you, I don't regret it. Not a single moment. She smiled back, her heart finally at peace. That night when the celebrations ended, Leora and Ethan returned to the garden where it had all begun. The fountain still shimmered, and the silver blossoms swayed in the wind. She leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, Do you think the stars meant for this to happen? Maybe, Ethan said with a smile. Or maybe we just chose each other. She closed her eyes, content at last. She was no longer the forgotten, unwanted princess. She was loved, she was strong, and she was free. And at her side stood the human who had asked her the words that changed her life forever. Will you mate with me? You are not enjoying the feast? Leora asked gently. I enjoy it, he said, but I trust celebrations the least. They are the easiest places for knives to appear. She frowned, studying him. He spoke as if he had lived through many battles, though he rarely spoke of his past. You sound like a man who carries too many scars, she said softly. Perhaps, he admitted. But tonight I would rather carry yours with you so you don't feel them alone. Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to reply, but before she could, a servant leaned down and whispered that her father requested her presence at the high dais. Reluctantly, she rose. Ethan gave her a nod as if promising silently that he would keep watch. As the night grew late, the feast ended, and the guests began to leave. Lanterns flickered low in the halls, casting long shadows. Ethan followed a group of guards escorting Leora back toward her chambers. But halfway down the corridor, something felt wrong. The air was too still. The guards seemed tense. Suddenly, one of them drew his blade, not against an enemy, but against Ethan. Now, the man hissed. The others moved quickly. Two grabbed Leora, forcing her back, while three lunged at Ethan. Steel clashed in the narrow hall. Ethan blocked the first strike with his arm guard and shoved one soldier into the wall. His movements were sharp, trained, the reflexes of a soldier who had seen real war. Leora screamed. Stop! What are you doing? One guard sneered. We serve the true bloodline. You will not rise with a human by your side. Ethan fought fiercely, but the numbers pressed him hard. A blade sliced across his shoulder, blood blooming red against his dark uniform. Still he did not fall. Run, Leora, he shouted, but she did not run. Her eyes blazed with sudden fire. For so long she had been silent, but not tonight. No, she cried, wrenching free from the guard who held her. She grabbed a fallen spear from the ground and struck with trembling arms. The guard stumbled back in shock. Her courage gave Ethan the opening he needed. With a swift strike, he disarmed another attacker, then forced the last to the floor. The remaining conspirators fled, their plan in ruins. Breathing hard, Ethan pressed a hand against his bleeding shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strained. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You were nearly killed because of me." "No," he said firmly, his gaze locked on hers. "Because of them. You are not the shame here. They are." News of the attack spread quickly through the palace. The Emperor was furious, demanding the capture of all traitors. Lord Sarek and his allies tried to remain silent, but whispers pointed toward them. Still, danger remained. The Empire was shaken, and many nobles argued that Ethan's presence was the cause. One shouted in the council chamber, "This human brings nothing but trouble. Send him back to Earth before more blood is spilled." Another added, "Princess Leora cannot be trusted to choose her own company. She is clouded by weakness." Leora, seated beside her father, trembled with anger. For the first time, she rose to her feet in the council chamber. "You call me weak?" she demanded, her voice ringing out. "I faced the trials before you all. I walked through fire and shadow. And when assassins came, I stood my ground. Do not speak of weakness when you hide behind words." The hall fell silent. None had ever heard her voice raised so boldly. Ethan, standing at the back with a bandage across his shoulder, felt pride stir in his chest. She was no longer the silent princess in the corner. She was aflame. The Emperor studied her carefully. At last he spoke. "My daughter has shown courage, and the human has proven loyalty. Until the traitors are rooted out, they will remain under my protection." The decision silenced the nobles, though many still glared with hidden hatred. That night, in the quiet safety of her chamber, Leora sat with Ethan near the balcony once more. The stars shone brighter than ever, though the night air carried the memory of blood. "You were hurt because of me," she whispered again, her voice heavy with guilt. Ethan shook his head. "I would bleed 1,000 times if it meant you could stand tall even once." Her breath caught. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a soldier, but someone who had chosen her when no one else had. "You protect me," she said softly. "But tonight, I think I began to protect you too." He smiled faintly. "That's what makes us strong. Together." For the first time, she let herself believe it. But outside, in the shadows of the Empire, Lord Sarek was not done. His plans had failed once, but he whispered to his allies with poison in his voice. "If she will not fall quietly, then we must strike harder. If the human will not leave her side, then we must take them both." The storm had only begun. The halls of the alien palace were finally quiet after days of tension. The attack of the conspirators had shaken the Empire, but their plans had failed. Guards still stood watch at every entrance, their weapons glowing faintly. But the storm had passed. The Empire now looked at Princess Leora with new eyes. For the first time in her life, she was not ignored. She was not hidden in the corner or treated like an unwanted shadow. Instead, nobles and common people alike whispered her name with respect. They spoke of her intelligence, her courage, and her role in saving the Empire. But Leora herself was not thinking about the Empire in that moment. She was thinking about the human who had stood by her side through everything, Ethan. He walked slowly beside her now, his arm still wrapped in a bandage from the wound he had taken while shielding her. His steps were steady, though she knew he was in pain. Yet he never complained. He smiled whenever she looked at him, as if to say, "I would do it all again without hesitation." They entered the royal garden, where the air smelled of sweet silver blossoms, and the sky shimmered with 2 moons. The place was quiet and peaceful, far away from the noise of the court. Leora had always loved the gardens, but she had always walked here alone. Now Ethan was here with her, and that simple fact made the night feel brighter. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly as they walked among the glowing flowers. Ethan looked at her with a puzzled face. "Regret what?" "Standing with me in the trials. Defying my people, risking your life against the assassins. You could have walked away many times, but you didn't." Ethan shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, I don't regret any of it. If I had left you, I would have regretted that for the rest of my life." Her heart ached at his words. She had spent her life being unwanted, and yet this human who came from another world spoke as if choosing her was the most natural thing in the universe. "You see strength where others only see weakness," Leora whispered. "Why?" "Because it's true," Ethan said firmly. "You are strong. Stronger than anyone in that court. They may have perfect bodies, but you have something greater. You never gave up even when everyone turned their back on you. That is the kind of strength I admire." Her throat tightened and she turned away, trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. For so long she had dreamed that someone might one day see her this way. She never believed it could happen. They reached the heart of the garden where a fountain of crystal water shimmered under moonlight. Ethan stopped walking. His expression grew serious, almost nervous, and Leora tilted her head in wonder. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. His hand was warm, steady, and careful, as though he feared breaking something precious. "Leora," he said, his voice low and honest, "I know your people may never fully understand. I know this may not be what anyone expected, but I don't care what they think." Her breath caught in her chest. His eyes held no mockery, no pity, only sincerity. Then he asked the words that shook her soul. "Will you mate with me?" Time seemed to stop. The garden, the moons, the stars, all of it faded away in her mind. For so many years no one had wanted her. Suitors turned away, nobles whispered, and even her own family doubted her place. She had begun to believe she would live and die alone. But here was this human, standing before her with such simple honesty, asking her not because of duty or politics, but because he wanted her. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she could not speak. Tears welled in her eyes, sliding down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Why? Why would you ask me that?" she whispered. By the end of the session, she no longer sat in silence. She raised her voice once, offering a suggestion about how human trade routes could be better linked to Veyara's outer colonies. A hush fell across the hall when she spoke, but Ethan nodded firmly, as though her words carried weight, and slowly, others began to nod too. When the meeting ended, Ethan walked beside her as they left the chamber. "You spoke well," he said. "I was not ignored," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "No," he agreed, "because your voice matters." That evening they met again in the palace gardens. Stars glowed faintly above, and the scent of flowering vines filled the air. Lanterns floated in the fountains, casting soft ripples of light across the water. Ethan leaned against a stone pillar, his expression thoughtful. "Back on Earth," he said, "I was never anyone important. Just a soldier, one of many. But here I see something clear. Your people. They don't know your worth. They are blind." Leora lowered her gaze. "Perhaps they see too clearly. They see the limp in my walk, the weakness in my arm. To them I am flawed. To me," Ethan said softly, "you are strong in ways they can't measure. You carry yourself with dignity even when surrounded by cruelty. That is not weakness. That is power." She met his eyes, her chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked at her with such calm honesty. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The stars reflected in the garden pools, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Leora whispered, "Ethan, why do you stay near me, when you could stand among the others?" His answer was simple, spoken without hesitation. "Because I choose you." Her breath caught, her heart pounding. She did not know what it meant, not yet. But she knew one thing, his words were real. And for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. The days after the council meeting were different for Princess Leora. For the first time in her life, whispers about her did not all sound cruel. Some nobles still mocked her, but others had begun to hesitate. They had seen her speak during the council, had heard her clear voice, and had noticed the human soldier at her side who did not waver. But change was slow, and not everyone accepted it. The empire was preparing for its yearly trials of dignity, an ancient tradition that tested strength, wisdom, and unity. Every member of the royal family was expected to take part, often with a chosen partner or suitor. The winners gained respect while the losers endured shame. Leora had never been chosen before. Year after year, her name was quietly left out. The excuse was always the same. She must not suffer embarrassment. But the truth was clear. No one wanted to stand beside her. This year, however, the emperor announced something different. "All my children," he declared in the throne room, "shall take part in the trials. The humans have come as witnesses to our ways, and our unity must be shown." The court was shocked. Whispers filled the air. Leora sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding. If she entered the trials without a partner, she would be humiliated before not only her people but also the humans. Her younger brother, Prince Kalen, smirked from across the room. Perhaps the broken princess will finally show us how weak she truly is, he sneered. Laughter rippled through the nobles. Leora lowered her eyes. For a moment, the old despair threatened to swallow her. But then she felt Ethan's gaze on her from where he stood among the human envoys. Later that evening, she wandered into the palace gardens, the moonlight casting long silver shadows across the stones. She leaned against the marble railing, her thoughts heavy. "You're troubled." Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned and found him walking toward her, his steps steady, his dark eyes calm. "You heard," she said bitterly. "I did." He stopped beside her, folding his arms. And what?" she asked, her voice sharp. "And I will be humiliated?" "And they will laugh when I fall. That is what always happens." "Not this time," Ethan said firmly. She frowned. "What makes you so certain?" "Because you won't face the trials alone," he said. Her heart skipped. "Ethan, you cannot. You are not of this world. The nobles will tear you apart for daring to stand with me." "Let them try," he said. His voice was steady like stone. "I've fought worse battles than whispers. If you'll have me, I'll be your partner." Leora stared at him, stunned. No one had ever offered before. No one had ever chosen her, not in private and certainly not in public. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I believe in you," he said simply, "and because I want to." For a long moment she could not speak. Then slowly she nodded. "Very well. We shall face the trials together." The day of the trials arrived. The grand arena of Veyara filled with thousands of voices. The stone seats rising high into the sky. Flags snapped in the wind. Drums thundered, and nobles filled the royal boxes with shining robes. At the center, the emperor's voice boomed. "Let the trials of dignity begin." The first test was one of wisdom. Great puzzles were set before the competitors, riddles carved into glowing crystals. Teams scrambled to solve them, their minds racing. Leora sat beside Ethan, her fingers tracing the carvings. She had studied such riddles since childhood, though no one had ever cared to ask her knowledge. She leaned close to Ethan, whispering her thoughts, and together they pieced the answers. Ethan's quick thinking matched her sharp memory, and their crystal lit first, signaling victory. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The broken princess had won the first round. The second test was one of agility. A great course of shifting platforms stretched above the arena floor, with traps that tested balance and speed. Competitors leapt and spun, racing to the end. Leora's heart pounded as she looked at the platforms. Her weak leg trembled at the thought. She knew she could not run across them as others did, but Ethan knelt beside her. "We don't need speed," he said quietly. "We need trust. Hold on to me," and so she did. Step by step, Ethan guided her across, his strong arms steady, his pace careful. When she slipped, he caught her. When she faltered, he steadied her. Together they crossed, not first but not last either. And when they reached the end, the crowd had fallen silent. No one laughed. The final test was one of courage. Competitors were released into a dark maze filled with illusions and challenges. Many faltered, their fears made real. Some turned back. Inside the twisting passages, shadows rose before Leora. She saw visions of herself mocked, crippled, worthless. The voices of her people whispered all around, cruel and sharp. Her chest heaved, her hands shook, but then Ethan's hand closed around hers. His voice cut through the illusions. "Look at me, Leora, not at them." At me, she forced her eyes to his. His gaze was steady, unbroken. Slowly, the illusions faded and the path cleared. Together they walked through, never letting go of each other's hand. When they stepped into the light at the maze's end, the arena erupted. The emperor himself stood, his face unreadable. Nobles whispered furiously, but the people, ordinary citizens who filled the higher seats, began to cheer. They had seen strength not in perfection but in unity. For the first time, Leora felt their voices lift her instead of crush her. That evening, in the quiet of her chambers, she sat with Ethan by the balcony. The stars glowed above, bright and endless. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "I told you," he said with a faint smile. "You are stronger than they think." "And you," she said softly. "You risked yourself for me." He shrugged. "It wasn't a risk. It was a choice." She looked at him, her heart beating fast. For so long she had lived in shadows. But now, beside this human, she saw light. And for the first time, she began to believe she was not broken at all. The palace glittered with celebration. After the trials of dignity, the royal family held a feast in the grand hall, its crystal ceilings glowing with starlight. Musicians played, servants carried trays of food, and nobles raised golden cups in toast. But the loudest whispers were not about trade or politics. They were about Princess Leora and the human soldier who had walked beside her through every trial. Some were astonished. Others were outraged. How could a human dare stand with her? Hissed one nobleman, clutching his cup too tightly. It is an insult to our traditions, muttered another. And yet, a third admitted, they won respect today. Even the people cheered. In the shadows of the hall, not all were pleased. There were those who had long wanted Leora forgotten, hidden away as a shame. Her success in the trials threatened their plans. If the broken princess gained honor, she might one day claim real power. That could not be allowed. Among them was Lord Sarek, a cousin of the emperor whose eyes burned with ambition. He whispered to his allies, "This human has given her strength. Remove him and she will fall again." Leora herself was unaware of these whispers. She sat at the long table, her heart lighter than it had ever been. For once her father did not look at her with pity, but with something close to pride. Even her brother Kalen kept his mocking tongue quiet, though his narrowed eyes revealed his anger. Ethan sat beside her, eating little, his eyes scanning the hall as if searching for threats. The stars above the capital of Veyara glimmered like jewels on black velvet. But inside the grand palace, Princess Leora felt only darkness. The throne hall was alive with music, laughter, and the voices of nobles dressed in shimmering silks. Yet she sat alone at the far edge, her pale hands folded in her lap. She was the only daughter of Emperor Kale, ruler of the great alien empire. From birth, Leora had been different. Her body was weaker than others of her kind. One leg dragged slightly when she walked, and her arm trembled if she carried too much weight. To her people, who worshipped strength and perfection, this was a mark of shame. Suitors from across the empire had once come to court her, but when they saw her, they left quickly with excuses. Some whispered that mating with her would bring weakness to their bloodline. Others laughed behind their hands, calling her the broken princess. Over the years, fewer and fewer tried. Now at 23 cycles, she remained unclaimed, a princess without respect, a royal without worth. Tonight was supposed to be different. The Empire was hosting envoys from Earth, the newly allied human world. Trade routes were being discussed, treaties signed, and friendships formed. The Great Hall was filled with alien nobles, merchants, and the curious humans, who wore strange dark uniforms with golden emblems. The Emperor sat on his golden throne, smiling at the humans, while the Queen nodded gracefully beside him. Around them, the younger princes and princesses danced, laughed, and boasted of victories. But Leora was ignored. She sat in her corner, her dark blue gown pooling around her feet, her long silver hair braided neatly by her maidservants. No one asked her to dance. No one even greeted her. A tray of untouched fruit lay near her elbow, forgotten. Her gaze wandered across the room until it landed on one of the humans. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp eyes that scanned the hall curiously. Unlike the other humans, who huddled together nervously, he stood apart, studying everything with quiet interest. When his eyes met hers, Leora's breath caught. For a moment, she expected him to look away, like everyone else did when they noticed her limp or her stillness. But he didn't. He tilted his head slightly as if wondering why she sat alone. Then, to her shock, he began walking toward her, her heart hammered in her chest. No one ever approached her willingly in public. Not nobles, not warriors, not even servants unless ordered. The human stopped before her and gave a small bow. "Princess," he said, his voice calm and respectful. Leora blinked. "You know who I am?" she asked softly, unused to anyone addressing her directly. "Of course," he replied. "Your father introduced the royal family earlier, but I noticed no one is speaking with you. I thought perhaps you might welcome company." Her lips parted slightly. No alien had ever said such words to her. They assumed she wanted to be left alone, or worse, that she was not worth their time. "You are bold," she murmured, tilting her head. "Most would not dare." The human smiled faintly. "Most are cowards, then." She could not help it. Her mouth curved into the smallest smile. "You are strange for a human." "Strange?" He chuckled. "I've been called that before. My name is Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar sound. I am Leora. I know, he said, settling into the empty chair beside her. So, Princess Leora, tell me, do you like these gatherings? The question stunned her. No one ever asked what she liked. People assumed her opinions did not matter. No, she admitted quietly. I find them tiresome. They remind me of things I do not have, such as, she glanced at the dancers twirling in the middle of the hall, their laughter ringing. Companionship, respect, a place where I belong. Ethan followed her gaze, then shook his head. Respect should not be given for how you look or move. It should be earned by who you are. And from what I've heard, you are wise and kind. Isn't that worth more than dancing? Leora stared at him, her chest tightening. No one had ever spoken so plainly to her. Most spoke around her, not to her. Most looked at her disability first, then her title. But Ethan looked directly into her eyes, as if her limp did not exist at all. You speak differently than others, she whispered. Maybe because I don't see differently than I should, he answered simply. For the first time in years, warmth spread through her chest. They spoke for the rest of the evening. Ethan asked about the stars beyond Veyara, about her studies in history, about her love of music. She found herself laughing at his jokes, her laughter light and genuine, something she had almost forgotten she could do. But around them, whispers grew. Alien nobles eyed the pair with thinly veiled disgust. Some muttered about a human lowering himself to speak with a broken princess. Others sneered, shaking their heads, yet Ethan did not care. He leaned closer as the music swelled and asked, Princess, may I tell you something? Yes? She asked, her heart fluttering. You belong here more than anyone in this hall. Don't let them make you believe otherwise. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but years of rejection had carved deep scars in her soul. Still, his words planted a seed, one she could not ignore. For the first time, she wondered, perhaps she was not as worthless as they made her feel. And for the first time, she hoped. The next morning, the palace was alive with movement. Servants rushed through the marble halls carrying trays of fruit and scrolls of treaties. Guards stood at every corner, their armor polished to a shine, and voices echoed as nobles prepared for another day of speeches and negotiations with the humans. But in her private chamber, Princess Leora sat in silence. She could still hear his voice from the night before. Respect should not be given for how you look or move. It should be earned by who you are. Those words repeated in her mind as if they had been carved into her heart. For years she had convinced herself to stop caring. She had told herself that loneliness was her fate. Yet one human soldier, Ethan, had spoken to her like she mattered. He had seen her as something more than weakness. A knock at her door startled her. Her maid entered, bowing. Princess, the humans will join the council chamber today. Shall I prepare your seat? Leora hesitated. Normally she avoided such meetings. She disliked the way nobles whispered when she entered, how their eyes slid toward her limp, how their voices grew softer when she spoke, as if her words carried no weight. But today she whispered, Yes, prepare my seat. When she entered the grand chamber later that morning, the council fell silent for a heartbeat. Rows of nobles in golden robes looked her way, their expressions carefully blank. On the raised dais, her father, the emperor, smiled faintly in acknowledgement, though even he seemed surprised she had come. The humans sat at a long table on the opposite side of the chamber. Most of them straightened nervously under the heavy alien stares. But Ethan, he sat calmly, his gaze drifting across the hall. When he noticed her, his lips curved slightly, and again she felt warmth spread in her chest. Throughout the council session, Leora listened more closely than usual. Trade routes, military alliances, and shared knowledge were all discussed. Whenever a noble dismissed human ideas as foolish or primitive, Ethan would lean forward with patience, explaining calmly. His voice was steady, his manner respectful, and sometimes his eyes would flick toward her as if checking whether she agreed. After hours of debate, the council finally dismissed for a break. Nobles drifted into clusters, whispering to one another. The humans gathered at their table, speaking quickly in their own language. Leora found herself standing alone, as always. She considered leaving, then she felt a presence at her side. You came, Ethan said quietly, his eyes warm. I did, she answered. Perhaps because of your words, I'm glad, he said. You belong here, Leora looked down at her trembling hand. Ethan, why do you speak this way to me? No one else does, he tilted his head. Because no one else has the courage to see you as you are, not as they expect you to be. Where I come from, we value courage in many forms, not just in battle. Sometimes courage is surviving in a place that tells you that you don't matter. Her throat tightened. Then, do you believe I am courageous? He smiled. I know you are. For a moment, the world seemed to quiet around her. The endless whispers of weakness and shame faded. Only his voice remained, but their peace did not last. A noble woman with jeweled horns and sharp eyes approached, her expression cold. Human, she said with disdain. It is not proper for you to stand so close to our princess. Ethan did not flinch. Why not? She is of royal blood. She deserves respect. The noblewoman's lips twisted in a cruel smile. Not pity. Leora's chest burned with shame. Her hands curled in her lap, ready for the familiar humiliation. But Ethan's voice cut through like steel. This is not pity, he said firmly. It is respect. Perhaps you should learn the difference. The noblewoman froze, her eyes wide with shock at being spoken to so directly. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ethan bowed slightly toward Leora and then turned back to the noblewoman. If you truly respected your princess, you would stand beside her, not mock her. The noblewoman's face flushed with anger, but she dared not argue further under so many watching eyes. With a sharp turn, she swept away. Leora's breath shook. She had never seen anyone defend her so openly. Even her father, the emperor, often remained silent when courtiers whispered. But this human, this Ethan, spoke without fear. When the council resumed, Leora found herself watching him more closely. He listened with focus, asked though,